Hi, everyone. This is Hannah Gutner, Commissioner Wilson's policy aide. Fun fact, I'm also a history nerd. So as you saw today, we're going to be doing our virtual office hours with a local history expert, Thomas Tart. And we're going to be going over the history of Florida's transportation system. Do you want to say hi, Mr. Tart?
Yes, good afternoon, Hannah, and good afternoon, audience, especially West Orange County.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and we're going to pull up a PowerPoint where Mr. Tart's going to share with us a bunch of information about the start of Florida's transportation system. And that really started on the steamboats.
Yes.
Alrighty.
Now I've lost you there for a second.
Can you see the PowerPoint, Mr. Tart?
No, I did till just a second ago.
Oh, let me try again. Can you see it?
No.
No.
No, I had it and then it disappeared. I'm going to Zoom, right? I got to go start over again.
Yes, stay on your Zoom.
Okay.
Do you see it on the screen next to my face?
No, all of a sudden you disappeared. Everything was going good. I could see you and I could see PowerPoint now. I'm just back to the box that says Zoom, join meeting.
Okay, try clicking the Zoom at the bottom because I can hear you. So I think you're still in it. You just might have lost the window.
Yeah, okay. They want me to go put my password and all that back. I don't need to do that, right?
No, you should be able to find the window at the bottom of your computer screen.
Verification, confirm your date of birth. I don't need to do that. All right, let me back up here. Okay. Do I go to Zoom or Zoom?
Yeah, click the Zoom icon. You should be able to see the window.
Well, it goes back to enter my email and password.
Okay, do you want to try leaving the meeting and coming back in then? And we'll be waiting here for you.
Well, I'll try it. Yeah, I'm going back. Now I'm hitting join the meeting and then nothing's happening. Now sign up. You want my
Well, you're still in the meeting.
Okay.
So we can hear you.
Right.
And we can see your icon.
All right. I just need to get back to PowerPoint. I had that, and now it disappeared. Yeah, I love all this technical stuff.
everyone, sorry about those technical difficulties, but we are ready to go. And as you can see, we're going to be talking about Florida's first transportation system with Mr. Tart. So I believe where we left off was Mr. Tart giving a quick introduction of himself. If you want to go ahead.
Yes, Thomas Tart, retired from Orlando Utilities, Florida native, fourth generation.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about steamboats and trains, and let's just get started. Yeah.
Okay. Hannah, if we talk about early Florida, we've got to think about what happened in Titusville. A tremendous find was happened in the Wendover subdivision. Jack Eckerd, the drugstore magnate, was building a subdivision between US 1 and Interstate 95, and it was called Wendover. He was digging out a swamp area, and his backhoe fellow discovered a skeleton called the Brevard County coroner. He came out and looked and said, "This is not a modern day American. This is an old grave." So they brought in University of Florida's archaeologists, and they said, "Oh, it's just another burial site." And then my university let me down. Then they called in FSU, and a fellow said, "This is phenomenal. Because of the mud at the bottom of the pond, the 7,000-year-old remains were carbon dated to date it to that period of time. And what he found was one of the most important archaeological sites in Florida and in the United States, because here 96 cadavers were recovered, most of which had the brain still intact. Because
wow.
The mud kept out the oxygen, therefore it wasn't destroyed like most Indian mounds that were here in Florida. So we now know that, and they were hunters. They would, based on what they ate, they came here to hunt near the Indian River, although they weren't on the Indian River or on the Atlantic Ocean. They were in between the village. But discovering what they ate and looking at their different burial artifacts, we found that they were all facing a certain direction in relation to the sun. So they believed in a spiritual body. They also found with them, if you were, say, a hunter, they found the arrows and parts of the bow. And then with the women who cooked, they found cooking utensils. So they believed there was a happy hunting ground, and they were carrying with them to that heaven what they needed. So the Wendover Dig,
all in this one area.
All in one area at the bottom of a little swamp area that the backhoe guy was trying to demuck to put a little road across, and that became the Wendover Dig. Unfortunately, it's in the middle of a subdivision, so they haven't opened it up to the public, but one of the archaeologists who was at FSU getting her PhD went over the story with me of the Wendover Dig, and it's just phenomenal here 7,000 years ago in Central Florida.
That is incredible. When was this dig?
The dig was, I came here right out of Stetson Law School in '68. This was in the early 80s or the late 70s.
Wow.
The great thing, Jack Eckerd, who ran for governor at one time out of St. Pete, donated this site to preserve it for future generations. And they reinterred the cadavers so that they can go back with new modern archaeology and here again review what this site
wow.
The second picture, Anna, is a drawing by a French painter in 1585. Now remember, Ponce de Leon discovered us in 1513, so this is some 70 years later. A French painter came here and he painted the big Indians from this area. They were Timucuans or Timucuans.
Yes.
And here they are in a dugout canoe paddling two squaws with the fruits of labor. They had been there on the St. Johns River and had got some corn and some other vegetables, and they're taking it to the background warehouse, a warehouse made out of straw and I guess some mud, where they would store, not during the growing season, those vegetables for the Indians to eat in that village. This is one of the first depictions ever of North American Indians, done here in Florida by a French painter, Lemoyne, in 1585.
That's amazing. I know the Timucuans were present in Alachua County as well. So that's pretty interesting that they're down here as well. That's
Yeah,
quite an expansive territory along the St. Johns.
It is, Hannah. And one other thing, over at Cape Canaveral, there was a different tribe, not the Timucuans from my home of Jacksonville down to Gainesville to here. There was a tribe of the Ayas, or Ayas, AIS, and they were a small tribe of Indians that lived at the Cape. And they, along with the Calusas and the Timucuans, were the early Indians, long before my Seminoles at Tallahassee.
Okay, so here we are now, taking a mini backtrack back to 1513 and 1562, an incredible drawing here.
Yes, and this is very, very telltale. In the middle, you see two Spanish or French galleons. Ponce de Leon, who'd been the governor of Puerto Rico, was looking for an island in the Caribbean, and the Gulf Stream pushed him off, not to St. Augustine, but to South Melbourne, and he called this new land Pascua Florida, which Spanish interpretation was a holiday back in the flowers of spring back in Spain. So he named what he thought was an island, Pascua Florida, flowers, and it became Florida later. And this was in 1513. He explored the East Coast, sailed around the Keys, and then up the West Coast, maybe a little above, maybe not quite to Tampa. Then he went back to Puerto Rico and said, I've discovered a new island, Pascua Florida, and they were going to send a colony here. Had not done so, but they sent an explorer, Hernando De Soto. So we have Leon County named after the original discoverers, Ponce de Leon, and then we have two counties, Hernando De Soto, the second county, named for the guy who landed at Bradenton, right there by the bridge. On a journey. 4 years he explored the Southeast, and he spent his first winter in Tallahassee, our state capital, about a half a mile from the state capital at a deserted Indian village. And Ponce de Leon was looking for gold, but what he found, and was recorded with his group of 400, one of his scribes, he found wonderful weather here in Florida. He found abundant grazing land for cattle and a mild weather and very good water. So when he got to the West, he hit what he named the Mississippi River. But unfortunately, because of mosquitoes, he developed malaria and died, and they buried him with a fire float there in the river. The survivors of that 4-year journey made a boat and sailed back to Mexico, where his widow was waiting on him, Ponce de Leon's, De Soto's widow, and she was told the bad news. But they reported back that this land may not have had any gold, this Southeast United States, much less Florida, but it had rich land, great water, and it was ready for the development. In the meantime, as shown in this picture, France comes and lands somewhere on the St. Johns, possibly just above there near Fernandina, and establishes a colony. So it predated St. Augustine by 3 years, 1562. So the first colony was not Spanish, as most of us thought. It was actually French. But when the Isabella and Ferdinand back in Spain hears about a French colony at Pascua Florida, they send Menendez to establish St. Augustine in 1565. The French hear about it. They set out with their boats in the St. Johns and the St. Mary's River south. And then what we have in the Caribbean today, a tropical storm hits, crashes all the French boats, and the Spanish gather the French soldiers up in small groups and execute them. A few of them pledged to Catholicism, and those Frenchmen live. They then leave St. Augustine and go up to wherever the French settlement was on the St. John's, which is believed to be maybe the St. Mary's near Fernandina, and they take over that fort and kill the remaining French survivors. So
Oh my God.
they say that St. Augustine is the oldest city, and there's an asterisk there. Pensacola, which was a Spanish settlement discovered before St. Augustine, but destroyed by a hurricane 3 years later, and the French settlement there on the St. John's, which was destroyed by the Spanish. So St. Augustine is the oldest continuous city in the United States, but third oldest in Florida. Now,
quite the asterisk right there, quite the condition. Yeah. The oldest continuous city.
Yeah, you got to look at that condition. Now, you've got to remember Jamestown and the Mayflower settlement there in Massachusetts was 70 years later. So Florida's first permanent settlement and the French settlement, Fort Caroline, predated the British and the Dutch that helped settle New England and the Jamestown colony in Virginia by
that's just incredible.
60, 70 years. But you don't hear about that because we were not one of the 13 colonies.
Right.
We were Spanish colony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really incredible fun fact to me, to think Florida is older than, what we think of as the foundation of America, those colonies in a lot of ways. Florida was here, and that's really cool.
Yeah, and Hannah, in this picture, which is really neat, you not only see the galleons, which is Spanish and French used to discover Florida, the French settlement, Fort Caroline and St. Augustine and Pensacola, but you see their rowboats and the little sailboats that they go up the rivers with. And then on the shore, you see the Indians. And the three pictures there, you got the Indians in the middle with nets. They made nets woven from palm fronds or whatever to trap the fish. And in the middle, between the Indians around the campfire, there are two Indians holding bows.
Bow and arrow.
They had the bow and arrow here when it came in 1565. And they used that to kill the Florida deer or to shoot bear or shoot even fish to eat. We did not have at that time in Florida, we did not have wild hogs. The Spanish brought them, which gives us trouble today. So we didn't have cattle or hogs brought by the Spanish, but we did have deer and we did have birds that the Indians could shoot and cook, and the fish as shown here with the Indians with their nets.
It's even interesting looking further into the picture and seeing that dichotomous split between the palm trees, and it looks like some sort of like fir tree on the right there. It's just a really interesting picture showing the kind of diversity of the experience here.
Great point, Hannah. And then to show that the Indians would gather together, you see the campfire and the Indians gathered around it. So they were a social people. They did have a hierarchy. They had a chief, and they did carry on life here for thousands of years, as we know from Wendover. Actually, the bodies, some of them date back to 10,000 years ago. So for 10,000 years, the Indians were here until, as this picture says, 1513, the Spanish arrived, and 1562, when the first settlement was brought here to the shore of East Florida.
That's just amazing. I mean, you put that in the time frame, that 10,000 or 7,000 years in the time frame of life as we know it, and it's almost unfathomable to think that Florida and North America were inhabited at all so long ago.
Right. And then you think about, I mean, we don't even know about the West, some of their archaeological, and then we think about not for money, but the Pilgrims came to Plymouth Rock for religious freedom. They had been ostracized by the Catholics. They were a Protestant group, and they left on a rundown boat, the Mayflower. They had two boats. One of them wasn't seaworthy, and they had to leave it in England. Here they came across and spent the first winter, thank God, with the help of the Indians there, to forge a colony in New England. But that was 70 years after the Spanish had the town of St. Augustine.
Just amazing.
Yes. Now, this next picture, Hannah, is really interesting because as a kid in Jacksonville, I always thought King's Highway was the King of Spain. Ferdinand and Isabella,
Yeah.
but that was all wrong, because Florida was first settled by the Spanish, first by the French, then the Spanish, and then along comes the British, and they buy out Florida in 1770. I don't know, they traded Havana, they traded something, and Florida became a British settlement in 1770. Of course, here, the developer of Cape Canaveral planted sugarcane. So he wanted to be able to take his sugarcane and later rum from the Cape Canaveral area, not far from the missile silos, up to Savannah, Charleston, and maybe St. Augustine to sell. So he built the first road called King's Highway in 1773 from the plantation, sugar mill, and rum there on Cape Canaveral up towards Savannah. And that's what and he wanted the highway to be able to carry a chase and four. Well, it's shown in this picture. Chase and four means 4 horses, not mules, that can run on a good road and not only carry the ladies in the carriage as shown here, but carry the sugar and the rum to northern markets in America. So this is the first road, and sure enough, when Dorn, the park ranger at Kennedy Space Center, showed Bill Nelson and I the Indian mounds over there and showed us the sugar mill, he also showed us King's Highway. So the road in Jacksonville, King's Highway, isn't the Spanish king, it's the British king and his entrepreneurs that developed sugar mills to have raw sugar and also molasses, and then also later they distilled it and made rum. So 3 products were transported from Central Florida towards the north to sell.
Wow.
Now, the last one is the road that I did know about, Military Trail. In 1823, we became a territory of these United States. And it was the British, after losing the War of Independence, then at Yorktown, where George Washington and the young French General Lafayette defeated Cornwall and couldn't get out because the French fleet saved our bacon. The French sold to the British then sold back after losing the Revolution. And many Floridians left Florida to go to Bermuda and to Bahamas, Nassau, because they were true British, and this new country, the United States, was not for them. So we built a military trail when we became a territory from downtown Tampa, Fort Brooke, to Ocala, to Fort King. And the second road was built 52 years after King's Highway, just after we became a territory. And the military trail was built so that soldiers could go from Tampa, the port there on the Shillsborough River, to Ocala to enforce the new agreement to send the Indians, the Trail of Tears, out to Oklahoma. They had originally agreed to vacate the coast in the first treaty, and then the second one, they agreed to leave Florida and go to this, quote, rich land of Oklahoma, which that was a dirty deal, because at that time nobody knew about oil or what to do with it. They thought Oklahoma would be like Florida, and they if you would, talk the Indians into trading Florida for some land that wasn't worth anything like Florida. But they built this road. Now, the reason the road becomes famous, because a young major from Savannah named Major Dade leaves with a troop of soldiers, 108 of them, on military trail from Fort Brooke, downtown Tampa, by where they have the basketball and they have the ice hockey. He left there from Fort Brooke and headed north. As he got near Ocala, a day's march out, Osceola and Coacucci, the 2 Indian warriors, said, "We've got to attack before he gets to Ocala, the east side of Ocala, to Fort King." So they attacked. Osceola was not there. He was outside of Fort King and Ocala, and Coacucci and the Indians attacked. The Indians had rifles, and they could shoot an enemy at a longer distance.
Wow.
Major Dade only had smooth bores like a shotgun and could only shoot 100 yards accurately. So after battling for several hours, Dade did one good thing. He brought one cannon with him, and he fired the cannon at the Indians, and they retreated. But after they realized it was only one shot before they could reload, they moved in for the kill. Major Dade was killed, and after that, in the Dade Massacre, they call it, just near below where 75 and Turnpike cut together.
Yes, it's a little bit west, right? I think I've actually been there on the way to the Chancellor.
It's a little bit south. It's right off of 301.
Yeah.
And they then named later, when Florida became a state in 45, they named the biggest county, Dade County, after Major Dade.
How did Native Americans get rifles? From the Spanish and French?
The Indians traded. That's exactly what they did. They traded with hunters for rifles rather than smooth bores. And so they had better firepower and made Dade shooting with a single shot bore barrel.
Wow.
So the Indians could kill the American soldiers with Dade at a greater distance. And they killed them all except 3. 2 in the middle of the battle crawled off into a pond, and 1 played dead. After the battle, the Indians picked over the 110 soldiers, took their powder, of course, took their flint, of course, and took their lead, of course, and maybe accoutrements, like leather goods.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it was such a catastrophe when the 3 soldiers got back to Tampa, 2 together and 1 separately, and they told the massacre there weren't any more soldiers in Tampa to be able to go recover the bodies there at the Dade Massacre. So it was months before they came. They came with wagons months later, and then they buried Major Dade and his 110 men in the little cemetery in St. Augustine that I visited as a Cub Scout as a boy. And there they put him, the ruins, because they didn't have dog tags, in 3 mass graves under 3 pyramids, and Major Dade is buried there.
Wow.
Escaping, the 3 men got back to Tampa to Fort Brooke. 2 of them arrived one day. The commander said, "This is not possible." Major Dade had the cannon, he had a lot of ammunition, he had food. Surely the Indians couldn't wipe him out. And then a day later, the lone survivor, after the 2 got there, they didn't tell him about 2 being there. They got his story, and the stories matched perfectly. And then they knew what happened in the Dade Massacre.
Wow.
Now, one of the last men to die, according to the 3 men, was none other than Dr. Gatlin, Gatlin. I always thought Dr. Gatlin in Orlando, right below where I live, down at Pine Castle, was named for the Gatlin gun. No, the fort was named for Major Gatlin, who was one of the last men alive treating wounded soldiers and was killed by the Indians. So when they built the fort at Sanford, first fort a day's march in the Indian War was Fort Maitland. And then the second fort was none other than half a mile from where I am now, Fort Gatlin. They named it after him because of his courageous stand there with Major Dade against the hostile Seminole Indians.
That is amazing. So these were, at this point, they were the Seminole, not the Timucuans, right?
Exactly.
Because the Seminoles were kind of like the Iroquois, where they were kind of a confederation of various tribes,
they were
right?
Crossbreed, exactly.
Right.
And so the Seminoles were a new tribe. They didn't go back to Wendover with 8,000-year-old and 10,000-year-old cadavers.
Right.
But a fierce group. And you must consider that when FSU adopted them as their mascot, the Fighting Seminoles, they picked a very strong tribe to represent Florida because they were Florida Indians. And number 2, as Major Dade found out, and all his men, they were ferocious fighters.
Just incredible. Proud to be associated with them.
Right. Now, this is a picture of the early Floridians in wagons coming from Georgia and South Carolina. So Florida was made a territory in 1821. And they came to North Florida, establishing farms not much further than Gainesville because they were coming from Georgia and Alabama. The interesting thing about it was, here we were a territory and we established Fort Brooke in Tampa, but there weren't a lot of folks in Florida. It was
yeah, very few.
When we became a territory in 1845, some 24 years later, then we started developing the ports of Tampa, the port of Jacksonville, the port of Pensacola, and we became a true state. However, having a small population, we were not a port state.
Right. I mean, we didn't grow in population, at least I know, in South Central Florida, south of Lake Okeechobee, until really the 1930s and 40s.
Well, actually, we're going to learn a little bit about Henry Plant and Henry Flagler. That's not true. Henry Flagler did.
Well, I know he brought a few people to Miami, but nothing in between, really, right?
Right, except Henry Plant built a railroad to Tampa from right up here in Sanford, and then he went to Sarasota, and then he went to Fort Myers, here an Indian fort built by a future Civil War general. Fort Myers, right downtown on the Caloosahatchee. So, yes, those two guys, and we'll get to that in a minute, developed Florida long before Walt Disney came here 50 years ago. Now, this is kind of neat. You think of the covered wagons having mules or horses, but Florida trails were there were no roads. There were there was so much mud and sand, the mules couldn't walk very well, they couldn't plow very well, and the horses surely couldn't. So the early Florida folks coming here used oxen as the burden of beast of burden instead of mules and horses. And here's an ox cart hauling, I don't know, he's hauling oranges that the Spanish had left, or he's hauling potatoes. I don't know what he's hauling, but he's got a bunch of hampers with his wagon with those with those oxen. Now, this is one of the earliest maps of Central Florida, Hannah. This was done in 1839, and it's showing something very unique here.
Right.
It's showing Fort Maitland, Lower Middle, and then what I was talking about, Fort Gatlin, and then up to Fort Mellon. So Fort Mellon, the early name.
Fort Gatlin down at the bottom. You can see Fort Christmas to the west or to the east.
Right, Fort Christmas, the very east, and up between Harney and Jessup. I can't quite read it, but there's a fort there. Now, what's unique about this map, if we go up towards Gainesville off to the west, we see the Ocklawaha River and Fort Fowle, which is on the Ocklawaha. And then if we go, I don't know where Fort McClure would, I guess would be out near Claremont. But then we come.
Oh, I see it, all the way to the west.
Yeah, we come down, and this map of Jessup and Fort Mellon, what it doesn't show here is you could go by riverboat to Fort Mellon and across the river to Fort King, which later became a thriving town of enterprise, which is now the Children's Methodist home there. But then at that point, going down the river to Jessup and Lake Harney, except in extreme high, the riverboats couldn't go. So the end of the line was Fort Mellon. So they brought the soldiers there by riverboat, not by wagon train like John Wayne would do out in Monument Valley, but they brought them there by riverboat. And then they wanted to be able, so there would not be another Dade massacre, to be able to be in a fort at night. So one day's march is shown in this map from Mellon to Fort Maitland, which is now the city of Maitland. And then Fort Gatlin here in my neighborhood for the doctor that died. And then later Fort Christmas, which they've recreated. And if you have not seen what a soldier's fort looked like, Florida Territory, go out to Christmas just above Highway 50 to Titusville and look at the recreation of an Indian fort from that period, Florida Territory.
Wow, I've driven through there so many times and I had no idea there was a fort recreation there.
Yeah. Now, if you read the marker at Fort Christmas, it said in this vicinity. They don't really know where Fort Christmas was. They do know where Mellon was, and they got it marked on Lake Monroe. And they do know where Fort Maitland is. If you go there, there's a historic marker right across the street from the Civic Center in Maitland on the right-hand side. And then if you go down here to where Delaney Street runs into Fort Gatlin Road, I put the historic marker there, right there to Fort Gatlin. If you go read it today, it talks about 1836, them building Fort Gatlin to protect Florida as a territory from the hostile Indians. And with the help of the county commission, I was able to get the state to, and I wrote the language, and they put a historic marker. So
that's amazing.
The reason Fort Gatlin is so important, Hannah, it is the first commercial establishment in this entire county.
Wow.
Fort Gatlin. It was the first time they built anything, built by federal dollars to protect the soldiers at night. And they had a rule or law. You could not put a farm or whatever within 3 miles. They didn't want every one of the settlers coming right around the fort. They wanted them to spread out. So you had to be 3 miles away. So where Michigan Avenue runs into I-4 was the home of one of the early Orlando settlers who was far enough to have his farm and his country store, if you would, from Gatlin. And I don't remember that was Bumby or Harney, and I'm pretty sure it was Bumby's store, but may have been Harney.
Why did they want people to live 3 miles from the fort?
So that the settlements of these farms would be spread out. They wouldn't all be right around the fort. So that's, yeah. Now this is one of my favorite pictures. We talk about where I used to take recruits when I was on the Florida football team down to Silver Springs, because that's the only thing we had to show them. We didn't have any great waterfall. We didn't have any great beach. We didn't have much in Gainesville except Paynes Perry, but we did have Silver Springs. Here is one of what I would call one of the early tour boats of Florida, not out at Disney, a riverboat, and not in Jacksonville where I grew up. This is a sightseeing boat on the Tomoka River over in Volusia County. Now, what's so unique about it is the women are well dressed from the ankle to the neck. They're covered, and they wore a hat to protect them from the sun. And then on the left, a guy is holding a gun to protect them from what? As shown on the right, the alligator. Now this is a backup one. This is probably a 5-foot gator, and he could hurt you, but he couldn't kill you. And he wasn't big enough to carry in the water to eat you later. But the guy is having it by his tail and showing these two ladies a prehistoric Florida animal, the Florida gator. And look at their expressions. They're not smiling like they're at Ormond Beach or Flagler Beach or New Smyrna Beach. They're frowning to think that is one ugly looking, mean looking son of a gun.
Oh, they don't know the treat they were in for.
No, and then look at the smokestack coming out of the boat. This was a steam powered boat. Here, and the picture says 1888. Now, 1888 was after we had a railroad from Sanford to Kissimmee coming through Winter Park and Winter Haven, and a railroad out to Winter Garden, all to lure the tourists to Florida.
Something that continues to amaze me about Florida history is this is 1888, and the U.S. had declared independence almost 100 years before.
Exactly.
When you think about that, I mean, the disconnect almost between what life was like in Florida versus those other colonies is just so vastly different. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Let me, you just hit on something. When we were settled, and we became a United States, think about this. Florida became a territory in 1821. That was 200 years ago from now. Florida became a territory in 1921, and here we are in 2021, 200 years later. And
Wow.
a brave lawyer from Tennessee named Andrew Jackson had been in Florida fighting Indians, and he won the Battle of New Orleans against a superior British force right there at Calumet below New Orleans on the banks of the Mississippi. He was asked by the president to come take over Florida from Spain. So he left his palatial home in Nashville and came to Pensacola.
And the president at that time was Polk, right?
I think so. I'm not sure, but I think you're right. But there, the Spanish, they had agreed to pay the Spanish $4 million for the state of Florida in 1821. But Andrew Jackson, being a lawyer, said, listen to the Spanish governor in Pensacola, you have destroyed a lot of Florida. You've let the Indians destroy a lot of Florida farmers' crops, steal their horses and cattle, and burn their homes. You did not provide them protection. You owe them reparations. So he said, you're going to have to pay them. And out of that $5 million that I'm going to give you. So in the end result, the Spanish governor didn't get hardly anything. Actually, the agreed price was $5 million. So when the governor said, I'm going to protest, Andrew Jackson locked him up in the jail in Pensacola. So
What?
after a few days in the jail, the Spanish governor said, I'm leaving. You can have the damn state.
Oh my gosh.
Now, same time, the second turnover was at St. Augustine, a big Spanish town. So Andrew Jackson's wife, Rachel, said she had enough of Florida, Pensacola mosquitoes and sand gnats. She was going back to Nashville. So Andrew Jackson sent his second in command to St. Augustine to take over the fort and that historic town from the Spanish. And it became not only the oldest continuous city in the United States, it became one of the first towns, along with Pensacola, as an American town under the colonial governor, Andrew Jackson. And he was the first governor of Florida, and Jackson County is named for him.
Right.
Now, this is interesting. This picture of here again, it was a better road because they had a mule. Here, this fella has collected some kind of wood.
Yeah, like
and
timber.
He would haul it to the nearest river where they'd put it on river boats and take this lumber, not lumber, but wood for railing, fence railings, or cypress for fence posts, whatever. He's hauling it by wagon to a river junction and a river stop to put on one of Florida's steamers. Thus, the title of my program was Steamships and Railroads. So we're getting to the steamships now. Now, this is the first road besides Military Trail from, this is probably the third road, from Sanford to Fort Gatlin by way of Fort Maitland. This is the first road in this part of the country, the second road from Sanford to Orlando. It was nothing more than a one-lane wagon train, and it was an all-day trip. Joseph Bumby, Bumby Hardware, which became Church Street Station, he was the original Pony Express rider, taking mail from the riverboat at Sanford down to Orlando, connecting the two towns with mail service.
You know, this is where the history gets so fun, because when you find out learning more about the context of where you live, you can relate, you know, this guy to Bumby Ave, right? A road that many of us use all the time.
Great point, Hannah. Bumby Avenue, people need to know he was the first Pony Express rider. He carried the mail.
And that's a pretty important job in a place as spread out as Florida was back then.
Right. And can you imagine if it wasn't for stuff like the steamboat, we wouldn't have gotten the mail to Sanford.
Yeah. Just incredible.
Now, this is 1884. Rail is starting to come to Florida, but still riverboats, in this case, ocean-going steamboats, St. Indian River, pretty big river right off the Atlantic. Here, people are pulling into a port down there on the Indian River. All the produce, cattle, horses, dry goods are on the lower deck, and then dressed out in the upper deck were affluent passengers with their top hats, the ladies in dresses, coming to this new land of Florida. And it was the small steamers like we're showing here that connected to the big steamers that connected to the sailboats that went up north, or the steamboats that went to Charleston, Savannah, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston.
And look at this. This boat is called Marion. That's pretty interesting because, you know, we got Marion County, and I think that houses Ocklawaha as well.
Exactly. So this, after the Civil War, and they had them before, the early settlers would come by road from Georgia to Ocala, and there they would get on a steamboat like the Marion County, which is the county for Ocala, get on the steamboat at Silver Springs, come down the river to the St. Johns, and then to Sanford, where you would get off with your dry goods, maybe a wagon, and buy your horses and head to South Orlando, like Will Wallace Harney did, and developed a village here at Lake Conway.
Wow.
And backing up one, the interesting thing of this picture is, look up top. This
oh, yeah.
Steamboat. Look up top. He's holding, you got to go one more. Look up top, the guy, two of them right there, they're holding guns. Now, are they shooting deer to get fresh meat to cook on the boat? Or
no, they're shooting gators, right?
Yeah, or are they shooting alligators? I don't know. I would guess it would be, because there weren't any Indians at that time. The Indians have been.
I'd guess the gators.
Well, I would think it would be deer trying to cross the river so they could have fresh deer meat to cook. And then look, yeah, all right, now this is great. Traveling by wagon was no picnic. Look at all the mud on the wheels, and these girls are wearing long dresses, and imagine had to climb up on this muddy wagon to go for a picnic with family. And notice the hats. Women then, it wasn't fashionable to be suntanned. So women then wanted clear white skin. They wore the hats, and they're going to a picnic from Taft down to Shingle Creek. So that's South Orlando down to Kissimmee.
And pretty fun to think too, you know, in terms of county government, we just passed some more funding for Shingle Creek Bike Trail Phase 3 last week. So crazy to think about those connections.
Yes. Now, Hannah, this is interesting. This is 1861. I hope my nephew and Warner Robbins is still on the line. He lives, is shown here right near Macon. His kids go to Macon, shown on the line from Savannah to Macon to Montgomery and up to Atlanta. But he lived right, his kids go to school in Savannah, Macon, and right below there, he is at Warner Robbins, where he retired from the Air Force. But in Florida, there's only one railroad from Savannah to Valdosta to Thomasville. And then during the Civil War, they were building the red strip that connect the Georgia Railroad to the Florida Railroad right there. And that's what the big battle of Olustee was fought over. The Union commander from Jacksonville said, I'm going to go burn the railroad bridge so that Florida cattle, Florida salt can't get to the Confederate armies, so as to preserve hams and preserve meat like bacon. I'm going to cut off the Florida salt, and I'm going to cut off Florida cattle, because back then you had to have live cattle and butcher them and eat them within a few days, because they had no refrigeration. And that red strip part was what the Union soldiers left Jacksonville for their march to burn the railroad bridge across the river. And that's where Florida lookouts in Jacksonville notified the army in Savannah, we need help. They sent an army down to Valdosta, General Colquitt, who later became governor of Georgia. He marched his men all night to this railroad, leaving Tallahassee. He got on railroad cars and got to Lake City. And there, unbeknown to the Union troops who had scouted the area 2 years before and only found old men, a Confederate army waited on them. And just outside of Lake City, we had the only major battle in the Civil War. General Colquitt against the Union general from Hilton Head. And there, the Confederates won the big battle and prevented our state capital from being taken or being burned as every other capital in the South was taken.
Right, of the Confederacy.
Right. And here, Lincoln thought it was so important to gain Florida because Florida was not a rebel state in the broad sense. Florida was a farming community. Only less than 18% had slaves. Florida was a rural agriculture. You grew cattle, you grew citrus, you had farmland, naval stores with turpentine. We were not a cotton state. We were not a big plantation state. We had a few up in 3 counties, Mariana, Monticello, and Madison.
Right.
But Lincoln sent his army thinking that the Navy is shown here in this picture to my hometown of Jacksonville, thinking, you know what, the Florida may vote to come back in the Union, and wouldn't that be a coup for Abraham Lincoln? And they brought the army to go into Florida and cut off that rail transportation I showed you on the earlier map. Look at how many boats Lincoln sent to Jacksonville in 1864.
Wow.
They reoccupied Jacksonville for the 3rd time. Thank goodness they didn't burn Jacksonville, or I may not have had a hospital to be born in 100 and something years later. Now, here's a great story. Florida was bankrupt in 1881, and this businessman from up north, Hamilton Driston, came to Florida, and he bailed Florida out by buying 4 million acres. That's, an acre is a football field.
Right.
So he bailed us out. He for over $1 million, 25 cents an acre. Paid $1 million. He bought all this land with the promise he would drain it so you could plant it and grow in. And this opened up Florida for development.
But this was the spoiler, right? Because Hamilton Disston did not end up draining all the land. I remember reading a good portion of the book, The Swamp, where the people who were assigned to do the dredging were like, the war is against the mosquitoes. And it was so hard.
Right. And what he bought was 6,200 square miles of Florida.
Yeah.
So you can see. And because of that, Florida prospered because he bailed us out. And he never became a millionaire because he became short of cash in 1893. But his biographer said that it was his work and the work of what he did that took this native Philadelphian to be a famous Floridian.
And
now, this is one
Hamilton
of my favorites
County,
because
is it named after Hamilton Disston or somebody else?
Who is that?
Hamilton County.
You know,
is that named after Hamilton Disston?
No, I think that was Washington's cabinet.
Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton. I'm pretty sure of that. But here is one of my favorite Central Florida pictures. Now, all of these pictures, Heather, because I love Florida and love Central Florida, my only adult home. I've collected pictures, and this is one that I'm showing. If you look in the center up, you can see Lake Monroe, right at the very top, Lake Monroe, and you can see Sanford.
Yes.
And that's where the railroad started. And then you come south a little bit,
Lake
and
Dora.
then you can see Longwood off to the right. See Longwood? Yep. That was a big hotel built there. So you could come by steamboat to Jacksonville or outside ocean boat, get on a steamboat, come to Sanford, and spend your winter in one of the lush hotels there in Longwood.
Oh, and Oviedo.
Yeah,
Oviedo.
come just a little. Yeah, Oviedo, which was right near
Delwood, Lake Dora. Yeah. Oh, so great.
And look, right below on the railroad track, Osceola, which later became Winter Park.
Oh, wow.
Named, you see right above it, Lake Maitland, Fort Maitland, you got that. And then right below it, Osceola. So the train stop wasn't at this point called Winter Park. Right there in the neighborhood was Osceola. And then come down to Jernigan. Jernigan was the country store that served to the right Fort Gatlin. You see it?
Yes.
So the original stop was Jernigan, which is really near. Jernigan store, I'm told, was right near where the Merita Bread Factory was that closed years ago, right at the corner of I-4 and Michigan.
And that's what Orlando was originally called.
Exactly. The post office was named after Aaron Jernigan, Jernigan store, and that was the post office. Later, it becomes Orlando after the tale of Orlando Reeves, Indian fighter, but I don't know, or from a Shakespeare play. Buddy Dyer will have to tell us that. But
it's a little bit of a myth how Orlando got its official name.
And then you see Pine Castle was a railroad stop.
Yes.
And then you come down to Kissimmee.
Lake Butler, hey, West Orange. Woo-hoo.
You got it, West Orange. And Lake Apopka, look at the upper left. Third biggest lake in Florida, Lake Apopka.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting, Hannah, about this picture is that I did not know, and I'm a native Floridian out of Jacksonville, educated at the University of Florida and Stetson Law School. I did not know that there were two seaports serving Orlando, Jernigan, Maitland, Longwood. Sanford was a port, but I did not know till my buddy in Kissimmee told me Kissimmee was the port.
I have heard that before. Yeah, you could go up or down.
Go down to the seafood restaurant, the catfish place, and just east of Kissimmee, there you can see a painting on the wall in the restaurant of the steamboats coming up the Kissimmee River to serve the city of Kissimmee.
Amazing.
St. Cloud, the seafood place, had a painting. So between those two that built the railroad, that opened up our area. And then here came the two railroad giants, the two Henrys, Henry Plant on the left, Henry Flagler. They both worked at one time for Standard Oil, the oil company out of Pennsylvania. And then Flagler's wife, second wife, his first wife had died, brought him to St. Augustine for the winter. And then he realized that there was no railroad bridge across the St. John to Jacksonville. His wife said, why don't you build him a railroad trust? He said, better than that, I'm going to buy the railroad from Jacksonville to St. Augustine. And he built the big Flagler Hotel as one of the first magnificent hotels in Florida for you to spend the winter in.
Mm-hmm.
And then he built another one down just above St. Augustine at the beach there, a big wooden hotel, which was just taken down a few years ago. And then he goes on down to Palm Beach and builds his big hotel in a coastal, and later the great hotel on the beach, one of the great hotels in Florida. And then a widow from Miami comes and says, Mr. Flagler, will you come on down to Miami, which was
Miss Julia Tuttle?
Miss Tuttle. And he said, no, I've come far enough. I love Flagler. My wife loves the Breakers was the beach club. Now the resort hotel. My wife loves the Breakers. I built the golf course. No, we're not coming any further. Well, they have a freeze, and all of Florida citrus from Palm Beach north to Orlando and up to Ocala was destroyed. She sends a basket of Miami-Dade County, named after Major Dade, of citrus, and saying, why don't you bring your railroad down here where we don't have freezes? So he did. He built the railroad from to Palm Beach to Miami, and then he did the impossible. He built a railroad 110 miles from Homestead to Key West, connecting islands, one with the 7-mile bridge there below Marathon. And he did it miraculously with engineering, but he did it with salt water and coquina rock to make the concrete that made the railroad bridges. And today, if you drive to Key West, part of the bridges you're going to be over was built by Henry Flagler to connect Florida, actually Key West, to Miami. And then Plant had a steamboat line. You could take your railroad car from New York, put it on a steamboat there in Key West, and take it to Havana. Isn't that something? And Henry Plant, although he doesn't have a county named after him, he leaves from Sanford, goes to Winter Garden, Plant Street, downtown Winter Garden. And then from Plant Street, Winter Garden, he goes over to Auburndale. And then from Auburndale, he goes to Dade City. Excuse me, he goes to Lakeland, and then to Plant City, named after him.
I was going to say, he's got Plant City.
Yeah, into Tampa. And then he does what really opened up Florida. He builds a line around Tampa Bay to Clearwater, then to St. Pete, and then south to Sarasota, and then further south to open up the Indian fort at Fort Myers, becoming the city of Fort Myers.
Because Fort Myers was quite the big fishing hub, wasn't it?
Yeah, if you look at statistics, Henry Plant built 3 times the railroad mileage that Flagler did. They both were giants. And at one time, Mr. Plant was called the father of Tampa because he took the little fishing village and made it into a railroad center. And he was also called the father of Florida because of all the railroads he built: Gainesville, Ocala, Fort Myers,
Fort Micanopy.
Yeah, Micanopy. Yeah. So but Plant, because of his Flagler hotels up and down the coast, and his hotel there in St. Augustine and, of course, in Palm Beach, he built these wonderful resort hotels. Henry Plant built one in Tampa, and he invited his old buddy Flagler to come. Flagler sent back a cute note. He says, "Where in Tampa is your hotel?" Like he didn't know about it, right? This plush hotel on the banks of the Hillsborough River, just upstream from the Indian fort that they left from. And Flagler said, "Well, where is your hotel in Tampa?" And then Plant sends him a note back, "Just follow the crowd." Isn't that great? They were rivals, but those two men, more so than Walt Disney, built what we know today of Florida because of their railroads. Can you imagine? Ike Eisenhower dies at Gettysburg, and his widow, Mamie's there. What does she do? She gets on a train, a Pullman car, changes trains in Washington, comes nonstop with her Secret Service agents in a Pullman car to Winter Park, gets off the train, and spends her winters there at the old hotel in Winter Park.
Just amazing.
She, along with millions, did the same thing. When winter came to the north, they got on the Plant and Flagler railroads and came to Florida and made us what we are today.
It really is. And Mr. Tart, we're going to start wrapping it up a little bit because it is after 5, just FYI. Okay. So
this is an early train. I think it's important because in the front, you see that grate. That's called a cattle guard to get the cattle off the train get the cattle off the track when the trains come. 1886. This is an early map from the railroad 1883 that came to Orlando. Look what they did in 8 years. They developed all of Florida with these railroads, and one of which is the Flagler Railroad down the East Coast. Go over to Titusville and see it. That one's right there, going south. And then look at the track right above Lake Monroe, cutting off to come down south a little further, right in, come down the main, right there. That track coming off, that's the track that Plant went over to Tampa with, and later Clearwater and Fort Myers. 1891. And this is what made Florida the railroad to bring the tourists down. Then I didn't mention, Hannah, we took Florida lumber, cypress, Florida citrus, Florida lime rock from Polk County, and of course we took from Sanford, we took winter vegetable crops and cattle. We shipped Florida cattle by the hoof to the northern markets. Those 4 things: citrus, cattle, phosphate, and timber. That made Florida. Now, this is neat. 1907. Look on the right. There, the ox cart brought his wagon to the train station. So he could haul lumber, he could haul citrus, whatever, to get on the train station Atlantic coastline that bought Flagler out after he died in turn of the century. ACL station, 1907. Steam burning engine, had to get water. The logs I talked about, taking lumber, citrus, and cattle north, and then to the northern markets, because people love Florida cypress because the termites wouldn't eat it.
Oh yeah.
We don't have much cypress. And then
Narcoossee Depot.
look at Narcoossee had a passenger train. Who would have thought that? They don't even have a passenger train today.
Nowhere near it.
No, and then look at the citrus going to packing house, putting those wooden boxes, put cooled, ice cool freight cars and sent to the northern markets. Everybody loved during the winter Florida citrus, both tangerines, oranges, and grapefruit. Now here, vegetables. Remember, Oviedo was home of the winter vegetable crop. And look at all the hampers with the mule wagon bringing them to put on the railroad cars, ice cool, to go to the northern markets. The Dudas had a lot to do with that. And then, of course, you had to repair the locomotives, and that was the locomotives boiler shop. And where I met you at the Rotary Club recently, that was a plant to repair boilers for railroad cars, railroad trains. They made boilers right there in that plant where we had our Rotary luncheon a few weeks ago.
That is amazing.
Now, we move forward 20-something years, same train station. Look, there's not an ox cart. There's a Model T Ford, 1940.
Oh, yeah.
We've gone from ox cart at the Pine Castle International Railroad Station to Ford truck or Ford car. Isn't that something?
Now that is a great testament to, let's see, it was early 1900s to 1924. This is the way that Florida would be shaped.
Right. And Hannah, to conclude my program, this is a picture of the Orlando train station as it exists today, 2021. 90-something years ago, this architectural was put out for bid, and they picked the architect, and he built the 1927 station in a Spanish design, the original station. And today, you can get on 2 trains of Amtrak and go to New York, or you can go to Miami and Tampa using that same station. And also today, you can get on a Sunrail and go to Kissimmee, or you can go across the river into Volusia County. And
this
still
is the
using,
Sanford?
Yeah, the original train station today, 2021, from 1927, is still being used.
That is amazing.
In conclusion, Hannah, we don't need to show the rest of them.
Okay.
It's a train wreck, then we don't have time. But what I'm so proud of is these early leaders of our community, like Joseph Bumby, like the bravery of Major Dade, like the bravery of Dr. Gatlin, like the wonderful 2 men, the 2 Henrys, Flagler and Plant, that came here, built the railroad, built the hotels, and built us into becoming the winter destination of America. I was told at Rotary today by a speaker from the Visitor Bureau that we have become America's one of the #1 destinations in America for tourism, and that our airport, because of that, is the #1 airport, or has been, in Florida. And though we've lost because of the COVID so much, we're on the way back. So
yeah,
amen.
It is truly amazing to see how far we have come as a state and where we started, especially in the span of time that we've had relative to so many other states on the East Coast.
Right. So we've been blessed. The good Lord blessed those early frontiersmen who came here when we were a territory. He blessed us when we became a state in 1845. And then World War II came. We went from a population of 2 million in 1940 to 3 million in the 1950 census. All because of, we went from 7 military bases to 172 in 3 years. So World War II had a lot to do, along with the railroads helping those bases, going into what we are, one of the great states of America, blessed with clean water, clean air, and a wonderful community to be safe in.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're almost 30 million today. I think maybe we're 25 million today.
No, I think we're more between 21 and 22.
Okay.
Right. That's
Awesome.
the latest.
Well, thank
number
you
I
so
saw.
much, Mr. Tart. This was fantastic. I appreciate your time so much. It's such a pleasure to have met you at the Rotary Club meeting and to have this kind of historical expertise about our community right here is just such a privilege.
Well, thank you for trusting me, and I'm so glad you didn't get to see my ugly face because people would have turned off. So we did it.
Oh my gosh.
My face.
All right, Mr.
All right.
Tart, have a great day.
Good, and God bless you and all the people you serve.
Thank you, sir. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.